Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Poetry Thursday. This is a BookTube event where a few BookTubers like to throw a spotlight on poetry because it doesn't get all that much attention on the broader spectrum of YouTube. Uh, and my own Poetry Thursdays for the last good long time have been revolving around one particular anthology, on one particular type of poetry, contemporary American poetry. I have been going through this in chronological order under the assumption that it was a doomed enterprise, that we would start off strong and then everything would go off the rails. It's 20th century American poetry, where poetry as a popular genre that a normal reader could read and enjoy ended. The 20th century American poetry is what killed that, so that all of a sudden ward nurse or a middle manager or whatever who's got a job in the city and they make good money and they love to read, and like all the rest of you, like all the rest of us, they carefully guard and carve out time to read. They would go to their local Crocs and Brentanos or whatever to get a few books for the weekend. Back when that didn't require taking out a second mortgage, back when books were not hyperinflationarily priced. So they would go to the bookstore, to Crocs and Brentanos or Laureates or wherever it was, and they would get a few books. They would get maybe, oh, this is a new book about Hilton Head, and I've spent wonderful summers there, so I'll get this. And there's a new novel, and maybe there's a new volume of poetry. I follow a few poets and really like them. I'll get a few of those, and maybe a postcard or two, and then I'll be on my way. I'll have the front desk make a parcel for me, and I'll get on the train back home to Montauk or whatever to spend the weekend with my books. And those people, a lot of you are those people, those people still zealously guard their reading time, still make sure they have time for reading, but it would never cross their mind in a million years to buy a new volume of poetry. Not in a million years. And why? Because the new volumes of poetry are terrible. They're entirely code speak. They're entirely a secret language that you need a decoder ring for, but the decoder ring isn't that you go to school and learn some sort of new metric. It's that you have to personally know the author. And otherwise be shamed into saying that you like the dreck that they produce. And I knew going into this Poetry Thursday that sooner or later this volume was going to get to that. It was going to get to the downfall of poetry. But we're not quite there yet. Now, I still don't know. I still haven't decided what I'm going to do when we do get there. But we're not quite there yet. We almost are. We're at a figure called Laura Riding here, who has a body of work, and it was critically praised, and she is sometimes taught in schools. But she will be known to the broader currents of literature forever as the lover of Robert Graves. I won't say whether that's fair or not. I won't say whether or not she deserved it. But not deserved being his lover, but deserved being remembered for that. It seems to me that if you're willing to mortgage a lot in order to glom yourself onto fame, you should pay a penalty for that if that's what you do. But although she was Graves' lover, and for a little while there they were inseparable, which sounds to me when it comes to Robert Graves like a fate worse than death, she didn't learn anything from him about poetry. Something that we think of Robert Graves, we think of I, Claudius, and Claudius the God. We don't think about anything else. Maybe Goodbye to All That. All three of those books are great. All of them are classics, but we don't tend to remember that Robert Graves is also a really good poet. He'd be in this anthology if it weren't just American. And she didn't learn much of that from him. Much, or as far as I can tell, anything of that from him. So that even though the poem that we're reading today, this anthology gives us three, I'm only going to read one. It's from 1933, which is not all that far. It's not all that close to the apocalypse. You would think that I wouldn't mind reading it, but some people are quick learners, or pre-sentiments, canaries in the coal mine, as it were. The first two poems that the anthology's editors include here by her are all but incomprehensible. If you didn't have a footnote, you wouldn't have any idea what they were talking about. I think the third one isn't quite incomprehensible. It is sadly a ripoff. It's not plagiarism because he was a lover at the time, But Robert Graves wrote a great poem on exactly this subject that virtually had the same title. And that's what the third of her poems is called The World and I, and I think it is marginally comprehensible. So we'll go through it and we'll see what we make of it. So this is The World and I by Laura Riding. This is not exactly what I mean any more than the sun is the sun, period. The sun is the sun. So we're off to a poor start. But how to mean more closely if the sun shines but approximately? What a world of awkwardness. What hostile implements to sense. Perhaps this is as close a meaning as perhaps becomes such knowing. Else I think the world and I must live together as strangers and die. A sour love, each doubtful whether was ever a thing to love the other. No, better for both to be nearly sure, each of each, exactly where, exactly I, and exactly the world failed to meet by a moment or a word. That is a bit lovely. That is a bit lovely on the familiar poetic obsession of the gap between the written word and the actual lived experience, or between the written word and the objective world. It's a tired poetic subject, but as an old friend of mine said back before poetry became the ultimate gated community, if we don't have poets asking that question over and over again, where are the rest of us? Once upon a time, that was absolutely true. And that it does a fairly good job. It's a little bit sophomoric, but it does a fairly good job of asking that question. Mainly it starts off with that stark seeming contradiction right at the front. The sun is the sun. And the narrator of the poem is saying, well, this is going to be difficult, as if the sun were the sun, which immediately makes you think, okay, well, in what way is the sun not the sun? And of course, the way is one sun is the sun of language, described by language, brought into being by language, and the other is the actual sun. I don't know. I was raised and socialized by a far simpler species. I don't know that there's a difference between those two things. Poets seem to think there are, and this poem does a fairly good job of it. So we're not going to have a long Poetry Thursday today. Some Poetry Thursdays coming up will be longer and a bit on the ranty side, unless we decide to just give it up. Just move on to another anthology or some other, but maybe do poetry, not give Poetry Thursday up, but give this experiment up. A number of you already know the poem that I'm talking about that is actually the bell peal of the end of poetry. The end of poetry as a normal thing, as a comprehensible thing, is the thing that is understandable by anyone other than its author. In ages past, literature of any kind, verse, prose, whatever, that was understandable only by its author was called gibberish, and that was right. That was the correct description. And the last third of this book is therefore gibberish. So, and there's one signature poem, it would take me probably half an hour to read, that all of you know, a lot of you have already accurately guessed that that's the one that's coming in 1959. And I haven't yet decided, A, whether or not I should read it and talk about it, because it would take an hour. To both read it and talk about it would take an hour. But also, B, whether or not to continue with this anthology after that. I think we don't do things by vote tally on this channel, but I think if we did, the votes would be overwhelming in favor of me just going all the way to the bitter end of this book. But we will see. We're not there yet, and I don't think we're there next week. So that's your Poetry Thursday for today. It's Robert Graves' Lover. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.